This conference is about DEI, which of course stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. DEI is a set of principles that has recently gained traction in the United States and been operationalized in our leading institutions. Since the summer of 2020, a wide range of institutions, federal and state governments, corporations, nonprofit organizations, professional firms, practices, and associations, and educational institutions at every level have collectively spent multiple billions of dollars annually promoting DEI within their organizations. But in 2024, a few $billion isn't much money. A single person, Elon Musk, may be worth $1 trillion within several years. DEI merits the attention we are giving it because of what it rests on. At DEI's base is a worldview that didn't materialize out of thin air, whose influence extends far beyond the DEI industry. There's no neutral, widely accepted name for this worldview, but one might distill it into two principles. First, the relative lack of wealth, status, and power of certain racial minorities and of women is mostly or entirely the product of unequal treatment in the past and present. And thus, we should seek to eliminate not only the unequal treatment, but also most or all of the power, status, and wealth disparities. Second, traditional norms and institutions pertaining to sexual conduct, the consequences of sexual conduct, and sex roles unjustly constrain the autonomy of, and thus deny equality to, women and sexual minorities, meaning the LGBT plus population. This worldview, this combination of beliefs, is not specific to the United States, but it is specific to the West. And it's particularly strong in the white Anglosphere and Northern Europe, that is, the Protestant or post-Protestant or Germanic West, of which America is a part. This worldview, some consider it a form of leftism because it fundamentally targets inequality. But it is not, like Marxism, a class-based leftism that targets economic or class inequality. Perhaps it is a form of cultural leftism that targets inequality between certain culturally defined groups within an unequal capitalistic system, a form of leftism that is more interested in the black-white wealth gap than in the wealth gap, more focused on diversity within the elite than on the nature of relations between the elite and the base. For some, this would mean that DEI is not a true form of leftism. Regardless, this worldview that undergirds DEI, the pursuit of material equality for racial minorities and women, and of equal autonomy for women and sexual minorities, burst onto the Western scene in the second half of the 1960s and has since advanced in periodic bursts, most recently during the second half of the 2010s in what Matt Iglesias in the American context called the Great Awakening. The influence of this worldview on DEI is clear because DEI is primarily concerned with diversity, inclusion, and equity, a cognate of equality for non-whites, women, and sexual minorities. But as noted, the worldview's influence extends far beyond DEI. In a wide range of culturally and civilizationally significant offices, institutions, and professions, it affects who gets hired, admitted, nominated, appointed, who gets the scholarship, the funding, the award, the role. It affects our approach to immigration. It affects our norms about sexual conduct, our definition of marriage, our view of sex reassignment surgery and opposite-sex hormone treatment, including for minors. And it has these consequences because it affects the production and dissemination of information and culture. It affects what questions are asked, how they are framed, and what conclusions are reached in the academy, media, and the classroom. It affects what art is exhibited, what symphonies are performed, and what book, TV, and movie projects for adults and children are greenlit. So, if you're seriously discussing DEI, you're discussing a worldview that has profoundly shaped our society. Now, at this moment, the DEI brand is facing an unprecedented challenge, not from Republican governors and conservative activists, but from mainstream corporations such as Lowe's, Target, Coors, Ford, and Toyota, which have recently scaled back their DEI efforts or signaled they will do so, and from prestigious left-of-center media outlets, which have recently featured critiques of DEI. 2 months ago, the country's most influential news organ, the New York Times, published a guest essay by 2 Stanford academics entitled, "DEI is not working on college campuses. We need a new approach." The essay argues that DEI programs can be exclusionary and counterproductive and tend to inculcate theories of justice as if there were no plausible alternatives, to treat all white students, including Jews, as beneficiaries of white privilege and white supremacy, to instill a victim mindset, and to pit students against each other. Just 9 days ago, The Times published a 10,000-word investigative report on the DEI bureaucracy at the University of Michigan. The article was entitled, "The University of Michigan Doubled Down on DEI, What Went Wrong?" The report finds that despite spending $250 million on DEI since 2016, the University of Michigan has struggled to improve Black enrollment, its students overall feel less included, not more, and DEI has helped fuel a culture of grievance. October 7th led to much of this pushback against DEI. Immediately after the October 7th attacks, some pro-Palestinian activists argued that Israel bore sole or primary responsibility for them. Since Israel invaded Gaza, many commentators, especially left-of-center ones, have implied that Israel, not Hamas, bears primary moral responsibility for most of the civilian bloodshed in Gaza. More than a few say that Israel is perpetrating a genocide. Israel sympathizers in the political center and on the left have objected to these arguments and alleged that progressives, including many in the DEI industry, are judging Israel unfairly and downplaying anti-Semitism and Jewish suffering. The Times essay on Stanford notes that in one DEI program, Jewish staff members were assigned to a whiteness accountability group, and some later complained that they were shot down when they tried to raise concerns about anti-Semitism. The Times feature on Michigan reports that many Jewish students and alumni were astonished when in January, a committee of Michigan DEI leaders gave the school's Martin Luther King Jr. Spirit Award to a pro-Palestine student group that had issued a statement on October 7th justifying the murder of Israeli civilians. So, it's unclear whether the DEI brand will endure. But arguably, that doesn't matter much. It would be a mistake to assume that if the DEI label loses traction, the worldview at DEI's base, the metaphysical, anthropological, ethical, political, and narrower empirical assumptions that undergird DEI will go away. Those assumptions, that worldview, can be rebranded, and already have been to some extent. In the United States, a decent, if imperfect, indicator of one's partisan leanings is one's view of DEI. At the vice presidential debate, Tim Walz and J.D. Vance would have given very different answers if asked for their opinion on DEI. In this conference, we have something rare, a serious discussion about DEI that includes many DEI sympathizers and skeptics. The view that we take at PICT, the Princeton Initiative in Catholic Thought, is that public debates about DEI are tired, and the two sides are at an impasse rooted in conflicting passions more than conflicting, dispassionate analyses. At the risk of sounding dismissive, we know what public figures who support and oppose DEI say, and the two sides are entrenched. The goal of this conference is to help break the impasse by applying serious metaphysics, anthropology, ethics, and political thought to the fundamental premises of DEI. So, for example, in this afternoon's keynote address, Professor Mark Lilla of Columbia University will address the theme of inclusion from the perspective of French political philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville. But even more than philosophy, theology is the prism through which we will address DEI over the next 2 days. Naive critics of religion might ask what value religion can add to a conversation about DEI. The short answer is that religion is about everything, and thus can add value to any conversation. R.J. Snell recently said to me that religion, when it's reasonable, represents the tail end of an attempt to understand everything about everything in every way that everything can be known. Rabbi Mark Gottlieb made a similar point in a pre-conference discussion, saying that Judaism, like Christianity, like Islam, like any great faith, is essentially a theory of everything. Well, everything includes DEI. One of the many things that Thomas Aquinas seeks to explain in the Summa Theologica is why God created a world characterized by diversity rather than sameness. In treating human beings as fundamentally cooperative, Catholic social teaching naturally enters into conversation with the more adversarial theories of Marx, Nietzsche, and Foucault, which loom large in DEI's intellectual genealogy. And Christianity is probably more responsible than any historical force for putting in Westerners' heads not the idea of equity, but its precursor, the idea of fundamental human equality, the radical counterintuitive idea that human beings are equal to each other regardless of race, sex, worldly success, anything. Moreover, that we are equal in a way that makes each of us inviolable. Early Christians rescued exposed infants. They thought their faith transcended the divide between Jew and Greek, man and woman. The point is that religion in general, and Christianity in particular, have a lot to say that is relevant to DEI. And our hope is that through philosophical and theological exploration, we can identify foundational, overlooked areas of agreement between DEI sympathizers and skeptics, and on that basis reason toward more specific shared commitments that might take us beyond the DEI impasse. A lofty goal, perhaps, but that is what we are here to do. Okay, so in closing, a quick word about how we will proceed over the next 2 days. I hope all of you have a program which are available outside. Today, we are going to begin with our first 2 panels, the first on diversity, the second on equity. These will be followed by Professor Lilla's keynote address, which will be followed by our third panel on inclusion. There will be 2 30-minute breaks and a 75-minute lunch break. Coffee, drinks, and refreshments will be available soon. Bagged lunches will be available at lunchtime. Tomorrow, we'll have our 4th and 5th panels on friendship and enmity and on lamentation, which will be followed by Bishop Varden's closing keynote address on DEI from the view of the Benedictine monastery. Again, we'll have breaks, drinks, and refreshments throughout the day and bagged lunches for all. Today, we will end at 5:30 p.m. Tomorrow, we'll end a bit earlier at 3 p.m. Each panel and each keynote address will last 90 minutes, with the first half taken up by the panel or the keynote address, and the second half taken up by questions and discussion. The panel presenters will take questions from the moderator, then from the audience. The keynote speakers will take questions from the audience. We will have 2 roving mics for audience questions. The conference is being video recorded for public release. That is all. Let us turn now to our first panel on the theme of diversity. R.J. Snell will be the moderator, and our presenters are Charlie Camosi, Sebastian Milbank, and Angel Parham. Please join me in welcoming them.